Hi everyone, Evelina from Arcadier here. Today on Inspire, we're lucky enough to have Sara Green, co-founder of the sharing economy in Denmark, as well as founder and CEO of reputation and social verification tool, Deemly. Hi Sara, thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
I'm good, thanks for having me. How are you?
I'm pretty well. Thank you very much. So awesome. Let's just jump right in, shall we?
My name is Sarah, and I am the CEO and founder of Deemly. I'm also co-founder of Sharing Economy Denmark, and today I'll be talking about trust in the sharing economy.
So first, can you explain what the trust in the sharing economy actually means, just for the audience?
Yeah, wow, that's a big question, I guess. But obviously, trust is sort of what makes the wheels go round in the sharing economy. So for me, I need to trust you if I wanted to rent your car or a dress or whatever it could be. But obviously, what we see is also that it's the main barrier for users to really get engaged and for the growth of the entire industry. So that's obviously why we set up Teamly as well, to try and help build trust in those types of transactions.
Awesome. So maybe you can explain, how does trust in normal e-commerce or the economy differ from trust in the sharing economy and e-commerce?
Sure. So I guess for the last decade or so, we've been seeing that e-commerce has really leveraged different ways of building trust that can be via brands, but obviously we've been following sort of ratings and reviews on different e-commerce platforms. So you would know when, if you want to go to a restaurant, you look at Yelp, for example, and their reviews, or if you want to book a hotel, you go to hotels.com. So in that sense, it's been very normal for businesses to leverage their users or their customers' sort of interactions with them and having them rate and review their services. And so now what we see in the sharing economy, where it's more peer-to-peer, so there will always be two people interacting. And so in that sense, or at least in the best transactions, you will have maybe a host and a renter renting each other and the experience they have with each other. So in that sense, it's a bit more of a complex trust interaction, I think. But obviously also what you see in e-commerce is that there's a lot of fake reviews because it's easy to, it's getting better, I think, but in the beginning it was very easy to leave fake reviews and get your friends to recommend your business and so on. But when it's peer-to-peer and it's a blind review, it's much harder to fake that review and that interaction, actually.
In what way would you say that it's harder to fake?
So obviously the transaction needs to happen. So the way a lot of rating and review systems work, and also the way our system works, is that you will need to have the other one leave a review for you to be able to publish your review as well. So it's sort of a simultaneous review that you leave for each other. So you would have to have two people trying to fake the review and the transaction. So it's a big effort to make a fake review.
Do you think it would ever be outside of peer-to-peer, if maybe it's like B2B? Do you think that would also work?
Yeah, I think we're seeing that. There's a few companies working on sharing economy for businesses, where they share resources and gear or whatever they're doing. So I think that will be much more normal. And then we're even seeing, business review aggregators as well. So I think it's becoming more and more of a normal way of building trust, is that people, it's kind of like customer testimonials as well, on speed, I guess.
And I guess, how would you describe the trust in the sharing economy currently? Would you say that as a whole we're generally trusting, or are we still skeptical? Like, what's the situation right now?
Yeah, I think it's hard to say at an overall level, because it differs a lot from location to location and where in the world you are. But obviously we can see that the activity in the sharing economy is growing. So I think the latest numbers I've seen is that 20% of the world's population are actually using sharing economy platforms. So it's around 1 billion people, right? So obviously there's a lot of trust for the concept as a whole, but also among whoever you're interacting with. But yeah, I think so. Obviously, the US is quite ahead of anywhere else in the world, as with most things. But it's also centered around, the big cities. So East Coast and West Coast, and then the middle of the country is far behind. I know a few hubs in Europe are quite far ahead. A lot of things are going on in Asia, but you probably know a lot more about that. I was recently in Dubai, and they're becoming more open to, can we leverage the mindset of the sharing economy in any way to help tackle some of the social issues they have and so on. So I think there's a lot of movement in this space where obviously trust is a main factor, not only between the peers, but also towards, the governments and the businesses facilitating this.
Very interesting. You mentioned US and Europe as countries that are currently much more in the sharing economy model and much more developed in that. Are there certain cultures or economies that tend to be more open in adopting the sharing economy model and trusting it?
Yeah. So obviously I'm originally from Denmark. Now we're relocated to London, but so Denmark is actually one of the most trusting countries in the world. So you would think that we would have a natural tendency to use the sharing economy much more. But when you look at the numbers, we're actually lagging behind a few other countries. The UK is way ahead. And I don't think trust is the only driver for adapting into the sharing economy, but it's also, the main reason for users interacting in the sharing economy is the financial benefit that they can gain by either earning more money or saving more money. And so I think for a country like Denmark, most people they don't have a necessity to save or make that extra kind of money unless you're a student or things like that. So the driver for adopting the sharing economy is not as apparent, even though the trust issue is lower. So I think that's probably why, in countries like the US and the UK, where the differences between rich and poor are much more apparent, it's probably much easier to tap into those markets and really benefit those people that really need to earn a little extra on the side, or just really want to go on holiday, but maybe save by staying in an Airbnb than paying for an expensive hotel. Yeah,
that makes sense. I guess on the counter side of that, so since there's certain drivers for certain countries that aren't necessarily as trusting as, let's say, Denmark. Are there countries that are just so far away from that, whether it's economics or culture, that they just are having a hard time adopting the sharing economy model and trust within it?
Yeah, this was a big topic when I was in Dubai in November, where we had this discussion, and I think most people that live in Dubai are, they're probably fairly wealthy. And so they don't have that need, and also the trust levels and I have to be careful what I say, but there's a high level of corruption, and so the trust in government and other people are quite low, and maybe not Dubai specifically, but also just in general in the Middle East. So I think that was a huge barrier for them to understand why would this make sense for them. Even though there is movements, but that's probably going to be one of the areas where it's going to be slowest to adopt. And the thing I add on is that many governments that really go in and are pro sharing economy is also focused on the green agenda and can we help the environment in any way. And so that's obviously also more of a topic in some countries than others. So yeah, you can see a difference in that too.
How would you convince, or what would you say to countries or people that don't necessarily see the benefit or the need for them to be part of the sharing economy? How would you convince them on board?
So you want the sales fees for the sharing economy? Great, easy job. No, but for me, I think it's about the sharing economy is more of a mindset that you need to adapt to. And so that can take a lot of forms. But from where I sit, I see a need for us to really learn to optimize our resources. And so that can be, sharing economy, or it can be recycling and a lot of other things. But I do think that we live in a world where we need to be more dependent on each other and the resources we have. And at some point, it will not be a question whether we want to or not, but it will be, you have to. So I think the sooner we can get used to participating in those transactions, the better we can facilitate that transition. And so I know a lot of the bigger thinkers on this say, in 10 years, it's not going to be called the sharing economy. It's just how we do things. It's just the economy, really. So I think it's not about, necessarily a sales pitch. It's more about, this is the way the world is moving, and we better, adapt to it and get used to it as soon as we can.
Very cool. Well, I guess that kind of brings us to, so growing up, I know that my mom and lots of other parents would always tell you to not talk to strangers, not to get in strangers' cars, or certainly not to go into their homes with them.
Yeah.
Now we willingly do these activities and we actually pay for them. So Is this a change in culture or human behavior, or do you think we've always interacted this way, but now that technology has just made it bigger and much more obvious?
Yeah, no, it's a funny concept, but I think you're definitely right. It's something that we've probably always done. So obviously we've known our neighbors really well. We've shared in our local community, and I grew up in a really, really small town, and everyone would know each other. And I don't think my parents would be worried if I, well, they might have, but at least they would know who I would be going home with if I did. But so obviously what happens now is that with technology, we become this global village instead, right? So if you came to visit me in London, well, I know you sort of now, right? But in that sense, everyone is a stranger, but also not a stranger because of technology. So I think that trust level just becomes, I guess it's just stretched in a way where there is an inherent need for us to trust each other. But I guess it just becomes more apparent when you put technology on there and you become global.
Fair enough. So I guess the big question is, how do you actually build trust in the sharing economy?
Sure. So I usually have this 3-level model that I talk about, because it's not only up to technology, but so, and forgive me if it becomes a little academic here, but what I usually say is that I used to go into a sharing economy transaction, they need to first trust the concept of the sharing economy. And so, if I went traveling, would it make sense for me to stay in an Airbnb rather than in a hotel? And I think a lot of things factor into that. So is this something that my friends and family are doing? Is it even legal? What is the government saying about it? That's an issue in some areas as well, which really affects the adoption too. But if I sort of agree that this is something I would do, then it's obviously, do I trust the company, right? So back to e-commerce and so on, what we talked about before. So if something goes wrong, will Airbnb take care of my, query in any way? Do they have 24-hour support? Do they have insurance? All these things. But then at the sort of granular level, it's more about who am I actually staying with, and can I trust that person? So that's more the peer-to-peer trust. And again, there's a lot of factors leading up to how do you trust someone. And obviously trust is arbitrary, so it's not a yes, I trust that person, or no, I don't trust that person. That comes to show in whether you actually go into the transaction. But it's more about, I think I trust this person, or yeah, he seems a little sketchy, but I don't know. but obviously coming back to our product, so I've done research in this space as well, and what we can see is that what builds most trust in that instance where I need to choose, do I dare to stay with you, is what other people say about you. So coming back to ratings and reviews and your online reputation. And then obviously background checks, ID verification, pictures, all these other things are a part of building that trust image of a person. That was a long answer.
No, that was good. It's really interesting that you actually say that there's like this three faceted concept or model of the sharing economy, because obviously Arcadier and marketplaces also have three different sides for everything, which is the platform owner, and then the merchants, and then the buyers.
Yeah.
And many of the participants that are listening are marketplace owners. So they have also three different kinds of relationships between them and the merchants, them and the buyers, and then between the buyers and the sellers themselves.
Yeah.
So are there different strategies for building that trust between each relationship?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think, and adding on to that, a lot of the merchants and buyers can also be the same sometimes, and across different platforms, they can change sides. But I think it depends a lot on, are you a boat renting platform? Then, the most important thing for the boat owner is that it's, the boat is safe, and that, you have whatever licenses you need. Will you have someone to ride the boat with someone renting it? All these things. So I think, it depends on the platform. But I think there are general aspects of how to build trust, which is, support is really important. Insurance, especially if you deal with larger, very expensive items, or really personal interactions. So are you nannies and so on? That's also a really close relation that you build. A good rating and review system. Obviously, I have to say that. So I think that goes across all the platforms, but it really depends on the specific platform.
Got it. So what are three typical mistakes that companies or people make when they are trying to build trust?
Yeah. So obviously we've been speaking to hundreds and hundreds of platform owners or sharing economy entrepreneurs. And I think one of the biggest mistakes we see is that platforms launch without any trust building features. So they will think, we can always add on ID verification or a rating system or something like that. And we can just see that there's a difference in the platforms that have these, or just the basic trust features, and how fast they grow. I understand that you need to be lean and launch fast and all these things, but it's really not that difficult to build a rating system. I mean, we have a plug and play rating system as well, so it's really easy to actually add on to your platform. I think the other thing that we hear a lot of companies is that even if they might have a limited set of trust, what you would call trust tech or trust tech features, is that as soon as you start really growing your platform, it becomes hard to manage on a manual basis. So sometimes you will just get people, handling pictures of IDs manually, and people will email them to you or something like that. And it's not very scalable. So finding a scalable solution as soon as you start growing is really important. And then I think the third thing, which I know is a huge issue for a lot of the entrepreneurs we talk to, is insurance. So underestimating how long it actually takes to create a policy with one of the larger insurance companies. I mean, sometimes we've heard it takes up to a year. So it's really a long process. Thankfully, there's a lot of insurtech startups starting up that's also covering the sharing economy. So hopefully this is about to change, but I think it's worth not underestimating the timing on that.
Very interesting. So you mentioned reviews, and currently, obviously, trust in the sharing economy is created through reviews, as you mentioned. Do you think that this is the best way? Do you see this changing, or do you have thoughts on how it can be improved?
Yeah, good question. So we know from research that ratings and reviews is the strongest factor of building trust. After that, there's background checks, ID verification. Photos are really important as well. So that's a little trick that I usually tell platforms that might not have a lot of resources, but just getting people to actually upload an image of themselves builds a lot of trust. I think there's a lot of people talking about blockchain and how that can sort of help build trust in a way. But the problem with blockchain is probably that it's more binary. So it's either you're trustworthy or you're not, and that goes on blockchain. But really, trust is not binary in that sense. It's more arbitrary. So some will regard you as trustworthy even though they don't have a lot of information, or even if you have a couple of bad reviews, that's okay, because price is then more important. So I think it's a little harder to make a perfect system that will grow trust. And then I think, a lot of the entrepreneurs should look towards, what are the really big players doing here. So Airbnb is obviously one of the front runners in this space, and so look at what are they doing, and is there any way you'd be able to copy what they are doing. I think that's probably an easier way to move towards sort of not a perfect system, but the best system that is out there. Yeah.
Fair enough. So trust is often cited as the singular greatest factor for the sharing economy to succeed. How true do you think that this is? And do you think that there are other factors that are often overlooked that also come into play for the sharing economy to succeed as a whole?
Right. Yeah, so I think that comes back to our conversation a little earlier where, we know the main driver for users to interact in these platforms is their need to save money or make money. And then after that, there's, do you want to help the environment by optimizing resources or saving resources? Do you want some social interaction? So obviously millennials, they really want a personal experience when they travel, for example, rather than staying in a hotel where everything is the same. And I think trust is probably what sort of makes that or facilitates those transactions. And yeah, so I think that's sort of tied to the social interaction is really important for a lot of sharing economy users as well.
Very interesting. So I guess on that note, what's the biggest obstacle that trust in the sharing economy has to overcome in order to become the norm that you mentioned, that from 10 years now, it's not the sharing economy, it's the economy. What do we need to do in order to get to that point?
Yeah. Governments need to get their act together. I think that's the biggest factor. It's really, really harmful when, governments question the intentions of the sharing economy. And so I know there are really bad players out there that are gaming the systems and not adhering to local legislations and so on. And obviously we need to keep an eye on that. But every time, they say Uber is illegal, it also hurts a lot of other sharing economy players. So I think the sentiment and the way we discuss about the sharing economy is really important, especially from politicians and I guess the media as well. And it's not to wash the sharing economy clean, because there's definitely things that we can improve as an industry as well. But it is a new industry and we're still learning and figuring out things. But I really do think that governments can have a major role in it. And we see that in the UK, right? I mean, so they set up Sharing Economy UK as one of the first trade bodies to exactly understand what is this industry doing. They set up this trust seal where there's a few points that companies can adhere to be I guess it's not a verification, but it's sort of a stamp of approval, which is really helpful because it means that the users interacting on those platforms know that this this company has their things in order, even though the government has no idea what to think about the sharing economy. I think that could be a first step for a lot of governments to replicate what the UK has been doing.
Very nice. So maybe you can help out everyone and kind of give a brief overview of governments and what their views are on the sharing economy. If you want to break it down by like, UK versus US and what the current standing is.
Yeah. So I'm not, well, I guess I am up to speed on everything, but it sort of changes all the time. But maybe talking more about some of the issues that are being talked about. So in Europe, a lot of cities have banned Uber, for example, because so in Denmark, I know they were basically not adhering to the taxi legislation, and so they were banned. In other cities, it's because of safety reasons, and obviously just competing with established businesses, these things, and not protecting their workers either. So the drivers are maybe driving for really low pay. There's a few elements of that. And I think, and then looking from the other sides, there's been critics that say, well, Uber was only banned because they didn't pay enough taxes for those specific cities. And as soon as they were willing to pay more taxes, the ban was lifted. So I think there's a lot of politics in this as well that we should remember. And then for Airbnb, obviously they've been criticized because people might buy apartments or houses just to rent them out. And that means that housing prices increase in certain areas. And that's obviously bad for the local community. But then on the other hand, they drive a lot of tourism and so on. So it's always a way, and then it's hard to look at and decipher all the numbers around this. But I know some of the cities that have been really focused on this is New York for one, Barcelona, obviously London has as well. I think Copenhagen, where I'm from, I've obviously followed the discussions very closely. So there's a few cities that are really focused on these areas. Yeah.
It was really interesting just now when you were talking about criticisms of the sharing economy,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's low pay or people taking advantage and kind of driving, I don't know, like rental prices up or down, because now buying extra apartment space, or whether it's like bike sharing. I was living in Shanghai, and seeing the bike sharing economy happen, and then it was great at first, but then it became almost a nuisance where you can't walk on this sidewalk anymore. How do you deal with those criticisms? Do you think that they're fair statements, or would you say that there will have to become a compromise, and maybe the sharing economy is helping kind of find that middle ground? I don't know, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, and again, this depends on, so you mentioned bike sharing, right, which is a completely different game from ride sharing and to boat sharing and all these things. But I think that so the sharing economy is probably like a teenager, right? So we're still learning as an industry how to behave and act and find our place in this world. But there's no doubt that we're going to grow up at some point. So I think it's about for the government understanding that they need to take a stand and a decision and work with the industry to find what are the best ways for us to grow old together, to stay in the metaphor. But yeah, so I think it really is finding a middle ground, and some countries have been really good at engaging the entrepreneurs in this space and the thought leaders in this space to help them understand what is going on and how do we legislate this area. And again, we see more and more sort of trade bodies coming up, just like Sharing Economy UK. We set up Sharing Economy Denmark as well, and there's all around the world these type of organizations are popping up. So I do think it's something that we need to work together to solve, and also importantly from the industry side, acknowledging that what we do is something new, and that sometimes we might be wrong in the way that we're doing it. And so we need to find, or adjust to whatever makes sense for the government or even, society as well.
A good follow-up question would be, what company, in your opinion, has done the best job in creating trust within the sharing economy, or is a good example of the sharing economy behaving as a good teenager?
As a good teenager. Well, so I do really like, I know I keep coming back to Airbnb, but it's also sort of a very known example. But I've been in touch very closely with the policy they have there. And I know that they, genuinely want to help society, and that they listen to criticism from governments very, very closely, and they actually acknowledge a lot of the criticisms. And in many cities, they've been proactive in finding a solution for working on whatever criticism it's been. So I think there's this 90-day rule, so you can't rent out your home for more than 90 days a year, for example, and that's been sort of a step towards, that people don't just buy apartments to rent them out. So I think they've been really good from a policy perspective. But I also know a lot of smaller startups that are coming out now that are really focused on, going into the dialogue with governments and politicians to help them understand what kind of businesses are this. So I know in Denmark it's been a massive topic around tax avoidance, so that you will, rent out your house but not pay taxes from it. And in a country where we pay 50% in taxes, obviously that's a huge issue. But where a lot of the entrepreneurs there are saying, if I wanted to cheat in taxes or facilitate that anyone cheats in their tax declaration, I wouldn't be setting up a sharing economy company. It's probably the worst company to set up if I wanted to cheat in taxes. This is not why I'm doing it. I'm not trying to, be a bad guy, but this is the vision I have for the company. And so I think presenting those entrepreneurial stories or startup stories for the politicians, that has actually moved the discussion quite a lot, because they see they're not, bad companies trying to avoid certain things. They're just entrepreneurs with an idea and a vision. And so I think that's a way to bridge the gap.
Very cool. Okay, so I'm sure you get this question all the time, but I'm assuming that you've seen the Netflix show Black Mirror.
Yeah.
Okay, so in the episode Nosedive, society in the not so distant future is depicted as purely ratings-based. Every action is rated. We're able to live is based on your rating. Basically, your entire life is dictated by your rating score, right?
Yeah.
So what's your take on this? Is this what our futures have in store for us?
Yeah, how much time do you have? No, I wrote a long blog post on this. It's on my LinkedIn, so if anyone's interested, go read that as well. But first of all, obviously what's depicted in the show is a dystopian future where everything is seen from a negative side, right? So let's just have that in mind when we discuss the Black Mirror episode. Another thing is that these types of ratings that are portrayed in the episode is, there's one scene where this guy hands the main character a bagel, and then they both give each other 5 stars. And it's like, why would you give 5 stars for someone handing you a bagel? I mean, it's not about building trust in that situation. It doesn't have any value that I give you 5 stars for handing me a bagel. So I think, we need to, and I know this question that you're asking is obviously how do we prevent that from happening? But and from my side, it's more about, when you use ratings and reviews, it should be for a reason. You shouldn't just rate people nilly-willy and for no reason. So I think that's one aspect of it being really important. Another thing is that, the voluntary acceptance of going into a transaction means that potentially you'll be rated and reviewed. So obviously it's voluntary. It's always voluntary from our side if users want to transfer their reputation. And then I know, the Chinese government is doing a lot to, they launched the Sesame Score where there's a lot of ratings and reviews involved in scoring their citizens as well. Where the criticism have been towards, are they penalizing citizens for having a bad score? And again, I think it also depends on what are you using this type of data for. Where, of course, we're not taking away your Wi-Fi or not letting you fly if you have a bad score. It's sort of, our vision is more to empower the users to use the data that they have. But I do think that, coming back to your question, and I can go on and on about this, but obviously ratings and reviews will have a bigger impact, just as we've seen it in e-commerce. For a lot of ride-sharing drivers, their ratings and reviews are their golden ticket to actually driving. So it becomes more of a CV for them. And when you look at the whole gig economy or freelance economy, where you jump from job to job to job, obviously your testimonials, or what we would call a review, is really, really important. So of course you should be able to leverage that across, and that requires that someone aggregates that for you, and you have kind of a sharing economy passport or sharing economy LinkedIn in a way. So obviously we need to be careful that we don't use this type of data for penalizing people. And I think, regulating this area is also something that could be really important, or having guidelines for, what is a good rating and review system, and when should you even have one? So again, there's no perfect system, but what is the alternative for building trust right now? So yeah. Did that answer your curiosity?
I still am very curious if that's going to be what ends up happening.
Yeah.
Do you think trust can ever become a currency of sorts?
Yeah, I think, going back to my point before, is that, Uber drivers can't drive an Uber unless they have over, 4.6 on average. So that is, in a way, a currency. I know there's a lot of other startups working on different types of, maybe trust is not the right word, but they assess you based on different types of data. So Experian is one element of, they credit score you from a lot of data sources, and then you're able to be granted a loan or not. So, these kinds of data assessments happen, across a lot of companies and a lot of interactions. So trust is might not be the right word, but yeah, your assessment of who you are and your online identity as such is definitely already a currency.
Yeah, for sure. We definitely see that happening. So I guess we're about to wrap up very soon, but I guess I have a couple questions that some of our viewers might be interested in. Since you are the co-founder of the Sharing Economy Denmark, and you were just saying how important trade bodies can be, what advice would you give if somebody somewhere right now doesn't have that and would like to create one?
Yeah, well, it can start really easily. So the way we did it in Denmark was actually just over beers, and we were 5 entrepreneurs and an author who had been writing about the sharing economy, and we got together and thought, okay, we need to help the government because they were coming up with suggestions for regulating that was way off. I think the way that the UK has done it is to be much more closely related to the government from the beginning. So that it's not an opposing body, but it's actually, born out of helping the government or local politicians. So I think, usually sharing economy entrepreneurs know other sharing economy entrepreneurs in their area. So get together with them, see if you can find a politician that's really pro the sharing economy in your area or in your country, and reach out to them, and then, take it from there. I'm obviously happy to, talk to anyone how we did it in Denmark, but I think sharing economy UK is probably a better example of how to do it and copy whatever, the trust seal and so on. And I think they have a person full-time handling the memberships and all that. So that's obviously the ideal, but yeah, it doesn't have to be, a massive undertaking to begin with.
Very cool. Well, hopefully that will spark some interest for some people to go do it.
Yeah, I hope so.
So the other part that our users are probably, or our viewers are probably interested about is you as a founder and CEO of Deemly, which we've touched on here and there, but we haven't actually gone into. So maybe you can actually explain what Deemly is and how everyone can use it and how awesome it is.
Yeah. Do they need to know more than it's just awesome? No. So yeah, I guess the reason why I came up with Deemly in the first place was that I did research into the sharing economy and talked to a number of founders in this space. And so what they all identified as their main barrier was, how do we build trust for our users and how do we grow our business from this? And so my co-founder was running a sharing economy startup at the time I met him, but it wasn't really taking off. So he obviously knew that issue sort of firsthand. And so what we decided to build was the opportunity for users to take their reputation across different platforms, something that's being supported with the new data regulations that are actually coming out of the EU. So EU is now saying all platforms should allow their users to take out their data from any platform. But that's sort of something that came later. But basically what our product does is that it allows users to sign up to your platform, but in the sign up steps, we allow you to also pull in ratings, reviews, and your profiles from other sites. So for really early startups, that helps them, overcome that cold start issue where no users have a reputation. And for larger platforms, it's more about reactivating some of the users that might have a bad reputation on your platform or have never become active, really. And then we have sort of a plug and play rating and review system as well. And the latest features we've rolled out is ID verification, just because that from a KYC perspective, that's really important for some platforms as well. But it's pretty well explained on the website as well.
Everybody go check out Deemly.
Exactly.
So last question is, what's your favorite sharing economy platform that you use?
Oh, that's such a good question. Well, so I always try to stay in Airbnbs when I travel. So, but that's sort of the obvious one. I've actually just rented a dress from Girl Meets Dress because I'm going to my parents' wedding anniversary, and it's a super expensive dress that I would never have been able to afford to buy. So it's not from someone else, but it's sort of from a pool of dresses that they have, and it's kind of sharing economy as well. So that was just brilliant, I think. Yeah, and then I recently moved, so I sold a lot of things on sort of a local eBay at home. There's so many good platforms. I can't really choose. Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you so much for joining us, Sara. We really, really appreciate it. And it's been great talking to you. What's the best way for people to contact you if they have any questions or want to get your advice or thoughts and whatever?
Sure. I'm pretty easy to find on any social media, but otherwise you can email Sara at deemly.co. It's also on the website, so I'm pretty easy to find if anyone wants to follow me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again, and hopefully we'll hear from you soon, and hopefully everybody enjoyed this presentation. It was great chatting with you again. Thank you so much, Sara.
Thanks so much.